Welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Christian Safici. I'm a solution consultant here at Imperity, and I'm actually dedicated to our partner team. So my responsibility is to have conversations with David and his peers a lot, talk about the value of the CDP, talk about how we create ROI for our customers who are using clouds and need a centralized and consolidated view of the customer. And so with that, I'd like to introduce the two panelists I have with me here today. First is David Chan from Deloitte. David, would you like to take a second and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everyone. David Chan. So I lead Deloitte's CDP practice, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today with Marina.
Excellent, thank you, David. And with that, we have Marina Clusis from Imperity. Marina.
Thanks so much, and thanks, David, for joining us today here. Nice to meet all of you guys. I lead Imperity's Global Partners and Alliances practice here, and I'm thrilled to get the chance to have this conversation.
Excellent. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. So before we get into some of my questions I have for you both today, let's just take a second, take a step back, and let's talk about why we're all here today, right? So at Imperity, we all know we work with brands, and we're really trying to help them understand their most valued customers, because what they're really trying to do is personalize and create those rich and engaging experiences, right? To build that trust with their customer so they can continue that relationship far into the future. So with some of those new marketing technologies that come up, David, I'd love to hear from you. If you can walk us through kind of what Deloitte sees as brands as they try to align their tech stacks to solve their problems with their customers.
Sure. So if you think about companies looking to win and compete on differentiated customer experiences, marketing clouds are becoming even more important because they play that last mile delivery of the experience. But though marketing clouds, the technologies are great, a lot of times what fails you actually is the underlying data. They're very dependent on, good data, good outcomes, bad data, normally not so good outcomes. And so we really believe that data is essentially, I know it's a little cliche, but it's almost data is the new fuel, right? It really generates those signals that drive and allow marketers, sales organizations, service organizations to really unlock that greater business value, because those signals actually offer the insights in order to understand who are the customers, how do I truly personalize experiences, and all those interactions I have with them across multiple channels that are relevant and meaningful. And so that's the only way they're going to find a way to elevate that differentiated brand experience with them. Now, when we think about sort of the value of the data, Deloitte actually performs an annually commissioned study by Forrester. This is our third year in a row doing it, where we poll 425 professionals that own data as it pertains to personalization and experience. And what they see is, they see reduced acquisition costs, they see increased conversion rates, they see increase in spend per customer, and they see increase in customer satisfaction. Now, I don't think any of those stats are truly surprising, right? If you decide to do something, spray and pray versus something more thoughtful, you will see, natural results. What was surprising was that we looked and broke up the groups between leaders and laggards, and we actually saw a widening gap. Leaders are ones that were making investments in data-driven investments, and they were actually pulling away from the pack around laggards who were also making investments, but they were actually somehow falling behind. Now, what that told us was that though everyone sees the value in investing in some sort of data-driven investment, they didn't actually, like, laggards were underestimating the effort it actually took to make it work. They jumped in because they knew that it was important, but they didn't have necessarily the strategy in place. They didn't have the executive commitment, and they didn't know what potential partners to bring in to help them navigate this journey. And then the other trend that I think is really interesting, and part of the reason why I think started this relationship talking with Imperity, because you play in the space, is this trend around identity and identity resolution. Honestly, when I think back to the last couple of years, you never really saw identity resolution as a separate RFP capability. It was honestly something that was taken for granted. Now you're actually seeing it in RP. People are actually calling it out. Now, why is that important? I think it's because traditionally, you had marketing operations teams and advertising operations teams doing their own thing, and that was great. Now that there's a more sophisticated organization who's trying to level up and really be data driven, they're finding it to be really hard to create interoperability between what marketing is generating in KPIs, as well as what advertising teams are generating as KPIs, as well as sales and service. And so they understood that there was an issue, that it wasn't actually easy to actually connect both teams' underlying data sources to create that single source of truth. And there's a lot of flavors of single source of truth out there. You'll hear that. But even within an organization where marketing and advertising are so tight together, their data was not connected. And a lot of people understood that it was because the way they viewed identity, right? In advertising, it's cookies and device IDs. And then you look at marketing, they typically just look at email. I mean, that was really hard for them to connect in a meaningful way. And so I think identity is becoming a very huge topic and a trend where people are trying to understand what that means to their organization. I work with a client who actually has a dedicated identity resolution team. It was something I never heard of, but I wouldn't be surprised if going forward in the future, many organizations actually have dedicated function around identity resolution, not MDM, but a different type of identity management that spans traditional MDM, but more with identity that pertains to other functions across your organization.
Yeah, that's fascinating, David. I appreciate you going kind of taking us through that. In fact, I think I may have worked for a lot of those laggards in a previous life. I feel the pain. So with that, I think we'll get started. What I wanted to do first was start in publish a poll. So hopefully we can get the audience involved. We can have them participate in our poll question. Hopefully it's published by now. Let's see if I get, there we go. There, perfect. So again, for everyone in the audience, if you can just take a quick second, fill out the poll here. Are you currently using a customer data platform, CDP, to support your existing marketing solution? We'll give that one more second. And then we'll hopefully use these answers that we get back for you from this poll as we go through some of my questions and our panelists respond. So while we're waiting for that to finish up, let's go ahead and get started, David. And I'd like to just kind of continue the conversation that you started just a second ago, right? I'd love you to continue to share your thoughts on what marketing cloud success looks like, right? So you gave us a great foundation of data and identity resolution, but what does success look like when you start to bring a cloud into the platform, right? And can you give us an idea what maybe benchmarks we should consider, what ROI should be considered? Like, how do I stitch all of these things together to really determine if I'm a laggard or not?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, when they're first trying to determine what their strategy is for marketing clouds, is I actually don't think enough organizations actually think about, well, what is going to be our approach? And the approach I'm talking about is, are we going to go full stack marketing cloud, or we're going to go pure play? Pure full stack meaning, hey, we've identified a vendor which has a lot of coverage, not 100% coverage, but maybe 80-90% of all the technologies that we would want to use. Not all of them might be best in class, but it gives us coverage. Versus pure play, which think of it as best in breed. Now, why might a company go one versus the other? Well, full stack, they might say, well, it's too, I just want to get best value, right? They're going to bundle up all the technologies. Some I might not even need, or might not actually solve my business requirement, but that's best value. Versus pure play, traditionally people said, oh, my business is Snowflake. It's so unique that I'm gonna buy the best particular product for that particular thing that I do. But it's much harder from an integration and a vendor management standpoint, right? But then what's interestingly that I see is that full stack used to be something that smaller companies used to do, because they were trying to get the most bang out of their buck. But now and then more enterprise companies used to go pure play by saying, hey, I'm going to spend the money because I deserve the best and I want to have, the best product for my teams. Full stack is actually making a huge comeback. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of organizations are realizing that just tech complexity, it's just so hard to manage. They rather have potentially a single throat to choke, and not have to deal with finger pointing around integrations that, full stack offers you that, even though it might not offer you the best in class, or pure that pure play might offer you. The second thing I would say is that, to be successful with your marketing cloud approach is really understanding your use cases in the short term and the long term. You can chalk that up to any technology, honestly. Now that I see a very huge trend in the market around pilots and POCs and things like that, what I love telling my teams is we really have to start small but think big. You don't want to do pilots that lock you in and prevent you from doing anything in the future because you said, well, those use cases, weren't prioritized. Well, that's not the point. You have to be aware of them, and you have to design your technology architecture, future state architecture, your underlying data models to support the future state, even if you're going to start small with POCs and pilots. The other thing is, you need to have a framework in which you're applying that you can carry forward to create that use case catalog. So Deloitte has a framework, a 3D framework we call data decision delivery, that allows you to break down use cases based on, hey, what data do you need for the use case? What kind of insights or KPIs are you measuring in order to actually make a decision on how to then deliver it in which channel, for closed loop measurement and tuning and optimization. You don't have to use that, but I'm just saying you need some sort of framework in order to help you organize your thoughts and make sure you hit and are able to decompose those use cases, to make sure you have everything in place to make it successful long term. On using the same Forrester research that we recently conducted, some of the things that we've seen clients be able to deliver and achieve is 15% increase in campaign effectiveness, 5% increase in overall company revenue, 10% decrease in operational costs, and a 23% increase in customer satisfaction. And those are what those leaders are able to do in that study based on their investment in having a more investing in data-driven strategies as well as data-driven technologies.
Excellent. And that data-driven strategy does include identity resolution, right? As kind of a fundamental piece.
Yeah. I mean, you have to. That's the one thing that's overlooked. I mean, I think we're gonna talk about it a little bit more later, but yeah, I definitely think identity resolution is in something we take for granted.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's see if we have results of our poll yet. Let's see. Yep, there you go. Great. So awesome. Look at this. Great. 65-ish or 64% of our audience here is using a CDP. I have 1,000 more questions on that one. 18% says no. And 18% doesn't know what a CDP is. So it's a great opportunity to kind of answer some of these questions and really drive in on some of those topics you just talked about, David. All right, let's see what's next up on my thoughts for this conversation today. Let's get this one out of the way, right? So, as we hear often, right, as we're coming out of COVID, right, it's no surprise that the last few years we've seen this tremendous amount of digital adoption, right? Companies pivoted, in months that used to take them years. David, for you, right, two-part question here. What are the trends that Deloitte's observing with customer brands as they and the use of the data as they drive to that digital adoption? And then maybe how has that shifted from pre-COVID to today, right? So really around this, what are we seeing, and then what do we think is going to sustain?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of trends we've seen in the last couple of years. Even pre-COVID and during COVID, new customer channels and points of engagement it just continues to increase. I think COVID forced us to actually create more channels of engagement previously that were more digital in nature versus physical, and that continues to be a double-edged sword for most companies, because at the same time you are getting more data and have the ability to collect more, but you also have more possibilities to actually fail them in those moments with bad experiences. So it's that's why I call it a double-edged sword. There's also increasing tech complexity, right? So we talked about CDP. That basically became a category in itself in the last couple of years. We talked about identity resolution potentially being a category that's up and coming. And we continue to have, well, at least I continue to have at least 10 conversations a week around what's the difference between a CDP versus an MDM versus an EDW, or any other acronyms you can think about there. So text complexity continues to be a challenge. And then the other thing that I think is driving a lot of the change and disruption in the industry is really around cookies, third-party cookies being deprecated, and mobile ad identifiers being deprecated. Now, what does that lead to? I mean, people say that, but they don't actually know what it means. What it actually means for most companies is there's signal loss.
Yep.
What is signal loss? It means that the ability for you to actually measure and attribute has fundamentally been broken. And while CDPs don't necessarily directly solve for it, what it provides you is, hey, if I used to rely on third-party data and third-party vendors in order to help me target better, and we know now that the underlying infrastructure of that is broken, what should I invest in? And a CDP and identity resolution around first-party data, it's sort of one of those things, like, you can't go wrong. It's the thing you invest in, and it's resilient, right? It's durable. It's not going to go away in 5 years and can't be affected by something that someone else is doing in the industry. So I think that is a huge trend, which is driving some of the increased interest in CDPs. And then finally, back in 2018, is it going to happen? Is it not? GDPR happened, CCPA. Now you're seeing rollouts of other. So one of the most common questions you see in every single implementation, whether it's martech, adtech, CDP, claim resolution. Oh, so how are you going to handle, data service requests for all the things that matter around data governance? And though you can say that a CDP doesn't necessarily solve for that, it is a way for you to centralize the organization of your data so that you actually know where things are. So there is some sort of control center of sorts in which you can figure out, okay, if I can start from there, I can trigger these workflows in order to remove data from these different technologies. Might not be the final solution and the only solution, but it'll be a core solution as part of that, addressing that. So I know we're talking about a lot of data, but we feel really strongly around the fact that you really need to own your data, and by owning your data, that allows you to own your customer and consumer journeys. Finally, when we talk about the shift from pre-COVID to today, I think it's kind of interesting, because on pre-COVID we were kind of in this this trajectory around digital adoption and how things were already shifting more to digital, and everyone's trying to go direct to consumer. Obviously, COVID forced a lot of people to accelerate that, but I also think that though it sped up a lot of digital adoption, I also think that COVID forced some unnatural things. Like we crammed a lot of things into digital because we needed to do it, not because it was a good idea. And now that, I'm not saying that COVID is gone, but I think as we think about what happens post-COVID, a lot of things we might have rethought and said, you know what, we tried it, we flexed some, stretched some muscles that we didn't think we had, and we were able to do it, but was that really the best experience for our consumers? Maybe, maybe it's still a blend of a combination of digital and physical experiences in order to drive, the best experience for our customers. And I think that's why it's like the new normal, right? It's the new normal is going to be thinking and reflecting on what worked, what didn't. And it was great, right? We tested a lot of things, but now we know what worked and didn't, and we're going to move forward from there.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I actually think we'll see a lot of testing too, right? Folks who used to think, well, I can't do that because it'll take me 18 months. We'll find a way to test it, in a shorter period of time, and then, just like you said, make that determination as to whether or not it should stick or go. All right, Marina, I hope you didn't think I forgot about you, but I want you to weigh in here too, right? What do you think about this, right? What types of value propositions do you think customers are looking for from their CDPs that maybe they weren't looking for, pre-2020?
Yeah, no, I mean, first, David said a lot of great things. I won't repeat all of them, but they definitely share his opinion on a lot of it. I think COVID happened to just coincide with what was already happening in ad tech, martech, right? That the deprecation of cookies, the IDFA essentially going away. You can't underestimate essentially the perfect storm that brands find themselves in, having to rapidly shift to completely perhaps expanded and novel way of engaging with their customers over digital, and at the same time realizing that the way they had been accustomed to doing it is not going to be, lasting them perhaps through all of COVID. And so there was, I think, a franticness to the pace that we saw during COVID that led and is still leading a lot of brands to really take a good look at how they have historically thought about data, and is that building for longevity? Is that setting themselves up for success? And what sort of is the strategy that they should be aiming for long term? And I also think that while all of that was happening, there's a good amount of maturity in the customer data space, right? Like this acronym CDP, customer data platform, is really broad and kind of ubiquitous. And it wasn't that long ago where a bunch of us were sitting around scratching our heads and saying, oh yeah, have you heard this new acronym? It's like a CDP. Well, what is that? Is that a DMP? Well, kind of, maybe. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the new DMP, right? And so like that wasn't that long ago. That was like maybe 3 years ago. And I think a ton of maturity has happened in that time frame of brands and even the companies and the solution partners themselves understanding exactly where they fit in and what value customer data brings to the table, and kind of what a CDP vendor perhaps should look like. And so, historically, when I think CDPs emerged, it was very much like a marketing angle. It was that marketing activation use case. It was about workflows and automation and orchestration, which is why it kind of like felt a little bit DMP-esque. But sure enough, they went and they adopted there and they started using those tools. But increasingly, they sort of realized that there's limits to those tools, just like limits, with anything else, which is if you don't have good data in, you're not going to have good data out. It's what David said earlier, right? Like you need a good data foundation. And so now enter the perfect storm, enter COVID, enter a huge rise of digital engagement and the ability to not use cookies the way you used to have them before. And all the fact that you've got to have this good data in so that your marketing engine can actually work, and you realize that they have an identity problem. They have all these sources of data coming in from all these different places, and they don't have a good way to in fact resolve it, make sense of it, so that the marketing engine that they used to have confidence in can in fact they can have confidence in again, and it can function the way it needed to function. And so I think like in terms of what they're sort of now looking for, I think there is this increasing emphasis on, no, I have to resolve my data. I realize now that that's a problem. I get it. I realize how critical it is to what I'm trying to do downstream, and consequently, I'm going to look a little bit harder at my current marketing stack and say, am I getting the resolution of my data? Am I getting the IDR out of it that I think I actually need for it to be as successful as the money I'm spending on it to be successful? And I think some of, especially perhaps maybe those larger brands are recognizing that they don't have it out of the box, and they need perhaps a team internally to just be myopically focused on that working well. And some companies have decided to, some brands, some retailers, others, they've decided that they're going to go and build their entire ability to stitch IDs together in-house, and that certainly is a path to doing it. I think the challenge there is you're constantly playing whack-a-mole, right? You're constantly trying to keep up with the next data source and the next change, and you yourselves, that's not your core business, right? Your core business is perhaps being a retailer or being some other type of brand. And so I think increasingly it's a recognition that their data is messy today. It's only going to get messier over time. And they probably need to get a handle on it and find a way to efficiently organize it and resolve it that perhaps doesn't involve their own, sweat, blood, and tears to go do that, because it's not their core area of expertise. And that perhaps it's okay, to bring somebody else in, an expert partner who's aware and is educated as to how to bring systems together, how to bring an IDR system, into play nicely with your, existing martech stack.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. Yeah, and I've been there and building it yourself. It's definitely not easy. Uh, all right. All right, let's shift a little bit, right? Now I'd like to spend a little bit of time, a few minutes here, talking about the investments that companies need to consider when going down that marketing cloud path, right? Kind of dovetails into what you were just saying, Marina. If I'm not going to build it, I want to buy it. Now let's help the folks on the phone understand a little bit about what that is. David, I'll start with you, right? So the folks who are listening in today, what should they know before they invest in their first marketing cloud, right? You talked about ROI before. What about prior to even getting there, right? Is there any different from those who have some type of marketing cloud stack in place? Is there anything they need to consider? What are the pieces of the puzzle that they really should be getting on paper and thinking about?
Yeah, I don't think it actually matters whether you have a marketing cloud or think you have one or don't. And I think based on the poll, everyone said they had a marketing cloud, so it kind of doesn't matter. But I really think that when you think about CDP, identity resolution, all these things we talked about, these acronyms, the way that Deloitte wants to think about it is going back to our 3D framework. It's really data decision delivery, and why we think it's really important. It's kind of easy to simple for people to digest and understand, right? And if you think about forget about CDPs for a second. Think about ecosystems. Think about your platforms, your growth engine. What does that look like? For us, it's centered around a data platform. It's centered around a decisioning platform, and it's centered around delivery platform. Maybe you have one that kind of spans all three, or you have three, which is what traditionally, you have a data platform, a decisioning platform, and a delivery platform. And what are those? What should they be? What are they designated system of records in your systems of engagement, systems of of insights, whatever, right? Define those and align with your organization, and then figure out how they integrate together. What I think that if you can take that to be true, then the next part is most people think of data platforms as just, hey, I just need to move the data together one place, and my problem solved. We talked about it earlier. I think identity resolution is sort of this new Easter egg thing that it's popping up that says, oh, it's emerging. Actually, no, I have to think about how I'm going to resolve identity. When we talk about decisioning platforms, you might say, well, why do I need a decisioning platform? I have a personalization tool. I have something that handles my promotions. My email tool has personalization. Well, the problem is those they're all very channel specific. They personalize based off of that particular tool and what information that tool has. So everyone's trying to move towards, okay, if I'm going to make the investment to unify 360, customer 360 from online, offline data sets, why wouldn't I use that same information to build my models on to make decisions versus just saying, oh, my email tool knows this about my email communication, so I'm going to personalize that way, right? It doesn't make any sense. And then finally, from a delivery platform, that's really where the marketing cloud, in my opinion, comes into play. That is going to be the ecosystem that you've now connected together that will be able to engage customers at touch points. What is, the kind of data platform IDR equivalent is really orchestration. Next step is, what is the journey orchestration tool that's actually going to help you sequence which and know contextually, like, hey, I'm not just going to send an experience to a user based on this channel. I want to know what they did before in other channels in order to make a decision as to what to then promote them. So I really think about it as an evolution of, hey, if I know I need these three things, what are the other things I need to start thinking about as the pace of technology and expectations are changing?
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you kind of outlining that for us, David. And Marina, I realize we're getting close on time, and I want to answer some of these questions, but I also want to give you an opportunity to kind of think about that and reflect on it, right? So how do you kind of respond to the idea that customers are struggling, with their stacks today, and if they want to make an investment, what are your thoughts on where they should be looking to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, the way David laid it out, I think is brilliant, right? The martech stack is not some big monolithic single entity. It has very different components, and each one serves a unique objective. So the idea of thinking about it as there's this core thing that is a data platform element, a core thing that is a decisioning platform, and then a core thing that's a delivery platform. To his point, like, you can have some that stretch across those. That makes sense, but thinking about them from like their use case and why you're engaging with that tool to begin with, I think is the right lens to look at. I think customers struggle when they adopt sort of the dogma that they have to have, the visual in my head is like the cat in the hat thingamajigger, that fun car with all the arms extending everywhere. Perhaps a more ubiquitous analogy is like a Swiss Army knife, right? So like you can have this tool that in theory does everything, but it doesn't mean that, the little screwdriver on your Swiss Army knife is going to be a replacement for a power drill when you actually need one. And it's accepting the fact and realizing that, the marketing cloud of the tools that you have are going to be very good at some particular elements and keep them there for that, right? And use them there for that and accept that that's what they're good at. But then also, being open enough to realize that there are still weaknesses and there are things that they're not going to do as well. And consequently, you need to, shore them up a little bit. You need to perhaps bring in that power drill when your small little screwdriver and your Swiss Army knife isn't going to work, for example. And I think that the more brands can, I think they struggle with perhaps seeing that. And I think knowing, to David's point, that if you look at your stack in terms of the use cases that it's trying to solve, as opposed to saying, yes, it's checked all the boxes with all the little widgets and tools, I should be covered. But if you instead say, well, this is the purpose it has to give me, is it actually giving me all that value between data, decisioning, and delivery? I think is a really good framework for customers to try to overcome some of their gaps right now.
Yeah, I agree. It is a brilliant way to look at it. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. Enough of my questions. Let's get to some of the questions that came in, just to make sure everyone can kind of get what they're looking for out of the session, right? I'll start with you, Marina, again, if you don't mind. Great example, I think one's for you, right? Can you talk a little bit about an example where this has been successful, right? So where you've seen a customer kind of bundle all these things together, not just to go with a single Swiss Army knife, but to really find the best set of solutions that they're able to use successfully together.
Sure. I think there's a number of clients, and I'm sure David's got more use cases than I do here, but I think there's a number of clients that we've seen who have a martech stack, and they've essentially bought a CDP because it's part of the big package, and it's in there, but it's very rigid and formulaic tool, and it works perhaps very well with the other products that come within that stack. But if you have offline data or you have non-digital data, things that isn't just coming from your web analytics tags, it really struggles and it doesn't allow that flexibility. And so a lot of brands, a lot of retailers or travel and hospitality brands, they finance brands, they fall in this bucket of having a lot of in-person data along with a lot of digital data. And so being able to merge those two worlds together, I think is really hard in some of the stacks that the customers have perhaps traditionally bought. And so consequently, you have to identify and say, yep, there's been a number of clients that we've seen, for example, who have adopted Amperity's identity resolution capabilities, and they've put it sort of up the stack in front of the stack of their martech stack provider, of their CDP. And so you could call it that they have two CDPs, but in reality they have the ID res solution from Amperity, and then they have the sort of the marketing orchestration and tools and delivery tools of that martech stack. And it allows them the flexibility of being able to change their segments or their schemas really in Amperity's flexible environment, instead of having to re-ingest this stuff in a very rigid schema that the other platform would require. And David, I'm sure you've got similar examples here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you were talking about sort of examples where maybe a client or a company implemented some sort of marketing stack that came with a CDP as part of the stack.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the many flavors of CDPs out there, a lot of them are very let's just call it like deterministic in the way they match,
Yep.
which means if you have really clean data within your organization and you have what we call CRM IDs. There's just not necessarily from CRM, but what people say as a CRM ID, but a customer ID or identifier on all the files. It becomes very easy to stitch those identities together in that stack. Now, if you're not as fortunate to have such clean data within your organization, that's when people need to explore other identity resolution solutions that are a little bit more advanced. I think Christian talked about earlier, trying to build your own or using an MDM solution, but I think those only take you part of the way there. It's also takes a lot of investment and time to really tune it and optimize it. It doesn't always handle all the digital identifiers that that constantly come out, and so that's where you might want to look into identity resolution solutions out on the market. Now, there are kind of different flavors of that as well, right? There are identity resolution vendors where you have to batch up your first party customer records and send them out for batch processing, and then they send it back. That's okay if you're comfortable with sending, exporting, your first party PII data out, and it limits your ability to do real time sometimes, versus a solution which might be more SaaS in nature, where you can actually load it like you would any part of your martech or iTech stack, and resolve identities closer to real time in order to deliver on those experiences.
That's great. And in fact, I think you just answered mostly, or if not all, of my next question I was going to ask that came in. But the tail end of it, right? So it sounds like they have a marketing cloud today. They're a little unsure if they have an identity resolution problem. Is there something? The last part of this question, right? Should I be looking? What should I be looking for, right, to understand if they have an identity resolution problem?
The funny thing about identity resolution is that at the same time you want to solve for it, some organizations also aren't necessarily incentivized to uncover it because it actually creates a lot of chatter, right? It creates a lot of chatter in the way you report out on a lot of metrics to executive level. So how do you know? Sometimes you don't know until you actually have someone go in and do some sort of data audit or analysis of your data to say, hey, did you know these types of, pull different queries and say, hey, did you know that these types of data is getting merged or combined together? You think you have 10 customers, you actually have one, or there's over collapse where actually you actually over collapse like 10 people into one person when they're actually 10 different. It can happen both ways, right? And you would never really know that unless you actually had someone go and actually come in and perform that audit or assessment. But for those who are very serious about, hey, for me, it's not about ignorance is bliss. It's more about, hey, I really want to know, like, how my um, marketing dollars or how my investments are actually performing from an ROI standpoint. Um, I think it's really important for you to, you know, evaluate, hey, how do I check on a regular basis whether I have an identity resolution problem?
Yeah, thank you, David. Appreciate that. I think we have time for just one more quick one, and Marina, I'm going to give this one to you. Right? Question is, how can a CDP help me have a better RS, right? Return on investment, advertising spend.
Yeah, no, I think the core component of it has to be, let's break out that acronym CDP a little bit, right? Like there's a lot of noise just in that CDP. I would say from, the side of the spectrum within CDP of where Imperity sits, we have that model of good data in, good data out. And so there's also a lot of noise in your ROAS calculations when you're doing your sales lift study or your ROI studies, breaking down why perhaps you might see a lift, you might see a 3% lift or something like that, right? But is that really in fact the lift that you should have been getting if perhaps you had better data flowing in? Perhaps not. And so I think the critical component is it's not the CDP that Imperity thinks about is not necessarily playing with the how can we help all of your marketing orchestrations or journey orchestrations. It's how do we make all that stuff that you're doing wherever you choose to do it better? How do we make it healthier? And so we're going to make sure that you do that, or any sort of ID res component is going to help you ensure that you're collectively grouping all of your engagements with your customers together correctly, that you fully scoured every engagement you've had, and then also that you've tagged that now holistic customer identity with everything you know about them, and that you're doing that on essentially a real-time basis, right? As things come in, you're tagging and you're updating that profile. And so we're going to help you accelerate your customer profile so that you can get to a higher return on your ad spend. You can send messages that are more relevant to them. You can, if you want to, bring in third-party data and append what you know directly about your customer with other stuff you could find out about them. And all that stuff will help you, deliver stronger messages that are more relevant at the right time, that actually, encourage consumers to act in the way you want to measure them. So I think it really just comes down to good data in, good data out.
Yeah, I
Excellent.
wanted to add to that. I actually implemented a CDP for a client, a high-tech global company, about a year ago, and they had a mixed marketing cloud stack, and they told us that they didn't make any kind of major investments in martech, ad tech. CDP was the only thing that they did, and they saw a 4x lift in their programmatic. And then I said, okay, that's pretty cool. What about web and email? And they said, well, it wasn't as high, but it was very similar. Like it was very similar in terms of the lift, and that just goes to show you that you could be making some bad targeting decisions based on bad data, but once you unify the data, you can be a little bit more, thoughtful and precise in how you target which pieces of content to offer, and to get that lift.
Awesome. What a great example and case study. So with that, I think we're about quarter till the hour. So we'll end our webinar today. I thank you both for your time. Really appreciate you kind of providing your insights to the audience. And to the audience, I hope you learned something today. I hope you're walking away with some more insights and understandings of how the world of CDPs can drive a return on investment and some of the things to think about as you begin to engage. So with that, thank you all, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Marina.